Hey folks, it's Jeff Fuzzy Wenzel from the Woodshed Agency, and thanks so much for tuning in here. This is a rebroadcast. This is episode 193, where I got to talk to Brian Pulido from Coffin Comics. And if you did not get a chance to listen to this episode a few months ago, I can't stress it enough. Jump in, hang out, and listen to this amazing conversation about how Brian has turned Kickstarter and his comic books into a very, very successful business. All right, here's my interview with Brian.
Turn it up.
Brian, the red light's on, so it's go time. This is when we have to make magic. So hopefully you're ready.
Let's make that magic happen, Jeff.
Awesome. Well, I ask all my guests this. What did you have for breakfast this morning?
This morning I had what I have 6 days a week, and that would be a protein shake with granola and fruit. I'm super methodical. When I was a kid, I read that Einstein always wore the same clothes, so he never had to worry. And so I really have adopted that in a lot of areas of my life, including breakfast.
Okay. Same thing every morning. All right. I got it.
Yeah,
that's cool.
The treat is Saturday, and then Sunday's big breakfast day.
Gotcha. That's a plan. I'm close to that. I have the same thing, pretty much. A couple eggs, toast,
Nice.
Orange juice. Move on with my day. It's nice and simple.
The best. When I was a kid going to school at NYU, we'd go out for breakfast in the diners. It'd be like 2 over with rye. Good times.
Yeah,
Simple.
Very nice. Very nice.
Simple.
Well, cool. Well, we'll move on to why we're talking instead of breakfast foods.
Okay.
This
This is the breakfast podcast.
This is talk breakfast food. Well, cool. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell my listeners who you are and what you raised money for over on Kickstarter.
So my name is Brian Pulido. I am a comic book publisher with over 28 years in the game. And about 5.5 years ago, I launched my first crowdfunding comic book Kickstarter. And since then, we've actually launched 20. And 2 days ago, I launched yet another one. So we do one comic book based Kickstarter every quarter without fail. Wow. So yeah, we just, so what I do is largely comic book projects, and we just reach people all around the globe that way. And it's been incredible.
That's cool. Now, for somebody like myself, I'll be frank with you. I don't know anything about comic books.
And that was my attraction to talking to you, because we have an insular world. So what would you like to know about comics these days?
Yeah. So I don't know anything. So a lot of these questions, I always, I like to have these conversations too, because I don't know. I'm not in this world. I've got a young son now. He's starting, and daughter, and they're starting to navigate into this a little bit. And, I'm a fish out of water for a lot of this stuff. So if my questions come out of left field where you're like, what are you asking? Just know that I really don't know anything.
No, that's cool. I get it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess let's first talk about the campaign that we're talking about right now that just finished up. I think this one ended in May, end of May. So what was this campaign about? And is this part of a series or is this part of a project? So what was the last campaign that just finished up?
Well, actually, so we just launched a campaign 2 days ago, and it's called La Muerta Retaliation. And this is the 6th chapter in the first overriding story arc of our character La Muerta. So La Muerta is what we call a blood-soaked Mexican noir thriller. And it's a revenge-driven tale about a woman named Maria Diaz, a returning soldier from Afghanistan, who comes home to find her family wiped out by an occult-leaning crime cartel. Now, she goes to all the normal places to try to get some justice and can find none. Aided by the mysterious Faustino, she decides to do the impossible and to dismantle this crime cartel. So we've actually been telling Maria Diaz's story since about 2015. We do one 48-page chapter per year. We launch it in May. And my influence and excitement about this particular milieu came when I went to a Mexican Day of the Dead procession and learned a little bit about that culture. It was my initial entree. So this story is steeped in Mexican-American Chicano culture. And it's been received very well. And
That's awesome.
This new one just kicked off 2 days ago, and I think we're just under $70,000, which is incredible.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, that's so great. So what is the process then, I guess, in terms of the storytelling? Is it something that in 2015 you had the whole arch of the story, the whole thing put together, and then you just have been slicing and dicing, or does it keep growing year after year, project after project? Does it just keep kind of going?
Well, thank you for asking. One of the fun processes about making comics, and that I adore about it, is no matter what comic it is, and no matter what age group, and the great news is they're comic books for people for every age group, every interest, whether it's children, etc. Our books tend to be R-rated action film type stories.
Okay.
And for me, what's neat is usually at the end of every story, there's a cliffhanger. So the question that we as comic book people always ask ourselves is, what's next? What's next? What's next? I mean, I've been reading the stories of Captain America since July of 1974, and his story has never concluded, right? It's always what's next. So, but to specifically answer you, initially, I came up with the initial origin of the character, which covered about 96 pages. And then began the next question. Well, what next? And what next? And what next? And this particular chapter, meaning it's the 6th, I would say it's sort of the 3rd act of the first major arc.
Gotcha.
And we're actually seeing a showdown between our main character, Maria Diaz, and her arch enemy, Mama Z, who is the female lead of a crime cartel that completely believes the supernatural blesses her when she does evil deeds. So this story is a love letter to the films of Robert Rodriguez and Luc Besson, to get nerdy. The filmmaker Luc Besson has these wonderful action films that seem to have like a little extra going on philosophically. He made the movie The Professional, Lucy. Recently he made Anna. So there's some neat things going on there. What he's after is a bit of a touchstone. So although our story is a revenge story, it really is a rumination on what is the cost to your soul if you choose to pursue revenge. So it's not just a Expendables type revenge story where it's like, okay, the button's turned on and now we're going to go execute the bad guys. It's more like, what's the cost of what I'm trying to do here?
That's interesting. In terms of all comic books, has that always been the arch? I mean, it almost has like the soap opera thing, right? Like it's how soap operas go on forever, right? It's just there's always something in there. There's always a cliff. It's just, like does comic books come first, or like that storytelling kind of always just existed?
I think there's something about it. So you probably have talked about or heard of Joseph Campbell's Hero's Myth, and what he postulates in that great book is that even separated by geography, all of us have a commonality in storytelling. So a person in North America or Eskimo in the Antarctic, there will be a commonality to natives who've never even met people in South America, part of the human experience. So I think regardless of the trappings of the genre, whether it's heroic fiction, crime fiction, horror, there really is someone who's journeying, initially resisting that journey, and then when they enact it, they're learning something, their life is changing. So this is a way of saying that what is common in comics is that they do keep going.
Right.
And yeah.
And are there like in the business model of that, obviously that seems like a good business model, but is there also a tiring factor to people where they're just like, come on, like, what are you doing? Come on, doesn't make sense anymore.
I can only speak for myself also as a comic book reader and collector. I really can't get enough of the stories that I like. And it's interesting with comic books because I look at comics and let's take the Marvel or DC heroes that people all know and grew up with, right. Superman, Batman. I think on average, people do come in and out of that hobby 3 to 4 years. They move on, life changes. Right. But there are lunatics like myself who literally have read a character story upwards of 40, 50 years. Wow. I think it's one of the many things that make comics kind of unique. Because ultimately, most TV shows or even motion picture series, they do come to a conclusion. Right. I do think the Marvel Cinematic Universe has done a great job of telling serial stories, kind of a breakthrough. And I would also assert maybe the James Bond series of stories every 2, 3, 4 years. So I think that when a person identifies and likes the feeling they get from a given story or a character, they like seeing them again and again. Like for another example would be, I'm always up for another Mission Impossible film. It's like, okay, a couple of years went by. Yeah, sure. Let's see what Ethan Hunt's up to now.
Gotcha. So, I noticed on your page that you've got a pretty substantial team working on this.
Yeah.
What is it that, like, when you're starting to put together, I guess, a new story or a new book, new chapter,
Yes.
What are you doing? Like, what is your role for the team?
Well, specifically, I'm the publisher of the book. So let's say, depending on the book, I will plot the book and or co-write the book with my co-writer, Mike McLean. I literally will hire the art team, make the contracts. I will guide, from a comic book perspective, I will guide the book as the pages come in. I will check them against the script, and I will see if we've lost something in translation, if we're getting everything that we're trying to accomplish. And then, so the interiors of the comic book and the comic book story are one element. I also cast and hire the cover artists. And cover artists in our industry have a serious provenance. They're like the A-list celebrities in the world of comic books. And if I can attract big A-listers to the work, it actually adds a lot of excitement. Additionally, I'll actually
that's just the cover? Like just that, but that's not the artwork inside the...
Correct. Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. So,
and sometimes the same people.
Sometimes it is, frequently it's not. Because again, it's almost as if the cover could be a marketing tool. Let's say a popular artist does a cover, maybe their fan base will kind of come over and give something a try because of it. So to continue, Jeff, the answer to this question is going to take a while. So just because it is what it is, right? Although we do have a nice sized staff, there's a myriad of pieces. Mm-hmm. I'm so happy that I'm not involved with things like making a building or an airplane. I wouldn't know. It would go way over my head. But so I'll cast those people. During specifically on the Kickstarter campaigns, I actually designed the campaign with another fellow in-house named Nick G. And we take a look at all the mechanisms of not only the tier construction, but how are we going to present the campaign over time? How do we retain interest? How do we create peak moments? How do we continue to entertain people the entire way? So that's just on that piece.
Right.
And in the daily sense, I'm the publisher of the comic book company. So I'll actually work with our president, the publisher, on things like the budgets. I will work on so my core accountability is everything that has to do with customer service, sales, and marketing. Our president, Francisca Pulido, actually has everything to do with finance and then product fulfillment. So we have a warehouse where we have an entire staff that work and fulfilling the various Kickstarters and mail order and comic directed market stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's a full day every day, but it's a lot of fun. It really fills me up.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So on the, you were mentioning like thinking about how all of these Kickstarters also play out over all of these stories. And I'm assuming in that you also have to have the fatigue of like people going like, guys, they just need more money. Like, is there any sort of fatigue that you're thinking about in that at all when you're laying out multiple? I'm a serial Kickstarter too. I ran like 300 of them for music projects. So we got in this scenario where we're like, oh my God, we've ran so many of them that like people are just think that we're just like constantly looking for money, even though we understood internally it's much more than that. But like, do you guys have those conversations internally as well?
Well, Jeff, speaking for myself, I worry about everything. So that does cross my mind. I mean, fair to say, right? I always wonder, we launch these Kickstarters and anyone who knows me, they perform really strong in the comic category, yet I'm just a nervous wreck, I was the kid who was like afraid to play saxophone in front of people. So, during school. So before, I'm just a nervous wreck. So I do ruminate over all of it. Like, is there fatigue? Is there excitement? I'm judging that. And I think that's the question I ask myself every day. And given our current macro socioeconomic situation, how will people show up?
Sure.
Let's be honest. And the blessing so far, the non-religious blessing, is that things are good. So I do try to keep my eye on that all the time. But I kind of also feel like, especially now where we are at this time in the United States of America, that Coffin Comics, we're a ship and we have a plan. And we're just going to keep going on that ship. And certainly we're taking a look at all the factors, but so far so good and steady as she goes.
Yeah. 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 We're kind of in that same boat right now. Just like, all right, well, it's not that bad.
Yeah,
For like 2 weeks, we were like, that's it. Shut it
yeah,
down. World's
yeah,
over, but we're back on top. We're all right.
yep,
So
exactly. Yeah, I
that's
know
great.
those first couple of weeks when everything was in the shutdown, I was like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. What happens here? So, when do you know, I guess in your process of you're putting together this, probably right before, well, I guess, where does manufacturing fit in of like, not so much a prototype, but like the final draft of something before you go to Kickstarter? Or are you pretty much, you're ready to go, then you're going to Kickstarter? Where does it fit that you have like your final version of something?
So we use that date, the launch date. On that date, we have to have everything ready to print.
Okay.
So we backward track from there. And then we really do wait for the numbers. We'll try to make some estimates and guesses the whole time, but we really wait for close because that informs what all the numbers would be, but everyone's sort of standing by. But jumping back a little bit to this notion of perception of what is Kickstarter for. Mm-hmm. So I remember 5 or 6 years ago, people would say ostensibly it's just to give people that shot and that a year later you're going to get the product. But then what we noticed that emerged in comic book culture is that Kickstarter is a culture.
Yep.
So there's people who back all categories, and in our world, in our category, this is just an amazing content delivery system.
Yep.
So, I mean, in the beginning, I'm sure you could appreciate this. Our first year, we had 4 projects coming out quarterly, but we're starting almost penniless. We had put everything we had into getting them all going, and then they had to fund. One had to work after the other. They had to. And it's just, luck of what we call the comic gods that it all did come down that way. And to this day, clearly, having the funding helps fund the future. And we try to make that very measurable for our fans. In fact, I mean, our fan culture funded our building, and our building is super custom to like Coffin Comics. You could walk through it. There's a museum. It's amazing. And we open the doors for folks and give tours when we can give tours. Yeah. But we kind of really realized that there's an evolution in Kickstarter and crowdfunding. And part of it is it's a supply chain and people want to be on the other end of it. Are there a few who, cross their shoulders and say, I can't believe you're using it in this manner? And I get it. And I let them have that opinion, and I just keep doing what I got to do.
Yeah, for us, I think I had like the 20th Kickstarter ever. I mean, literally from like in 2010 or so. I mean, we ran a ton.
Rad.
Yeah, we met Perry Chen before he started it, and we had this idea of like, we wanted to do a Kickstarter, and we didn't know what it was, right? We just had this idea of how we were going to fund recording studios because, again, artists didn't have money, and we had this idea of just how content would be delivered in the future, right? And so for us, watching this progress and change. I mean, it used to be I'd put 5 or 6 tweets out and I'd raise $20,000. That's all I did. And then Facebook ads are now a play, and algorithms start changing. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh. And now you really got to have, frankly, your shit together before you launch. Like there just isn't any more of this, like, I put up a website, I thought money would come in. It's not that anymore. You got your stuff together. Flat out. Oh,
there is no doubt. Like we have room. We have a war plan, literally. So it's every day of the campaign, exactly what we're doing, what time of day. Of course, we're using paid social, and we have all kinds of layers and strategies. And yeah, that kind of works towards my personality anyway. I'm into all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's no joke, as you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's actually a good evolution because you really should have your stuff together before you go out and asking. You should have your social media in order and your emails. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but you probably should have it.
Well, I think speaks. Yeah. It's interesting because I was speaking to a younger group of people who want a Kickstarter in the comic book space, and I said, look. We come from 2 places. One is what do we authentically provide for people? And for our company, it's really fun and excitement in the domain of rock and roll inspired supernatural comics. Life mission. That's it.
Yeah.
Sorry. And then number 2, it'd be trust. So everything operates underneath that. So when I start thinking, can I be considered trustworthy? And for me to do that, I have to backward plan every single solitary step to be my promise. And, in our defense, we've done 20 Kickstarters, and 19 out of 20 were on time. One, the printer refused to print content. We had a sex scene they didn't like. It was To us, it wasn't much, but to them, it was something anyway. And so it caused us to have to go to another printer, but we were instantaneously transparent. And then, of course, our fans were like, hell yeah, do that. So,
right.
So generally, I think trust and, being your word is the game. Because that's how I mean, as a customer and person who likes to buy and get cool stuff, I just want to know that I'm coming working with ethical people. I kind of do what they say.
Yeah. But all of this is that underlying as to why the Kickstarter community is what it is, because if you don't have, if I bought and I support, I'm in, but if you mess up,
knives out.
Yeah, I'm not into you anymore. I know I ordered a couple of wireless headphones that never showed up.
Whoa. Yeah, we all have those stories, man.
Yeah, they exist.
Yep. Yeah, I've had a couple of those too. Yeah, we have.
But yeah, so let's go back a little bit to like I love like process and just kind of how you guys get to where you guys how it gets to that sort of those steps that are involved. When do you know that you have something? And do you ever have to like, I don't like what we got here. The art didn't meet the whatever, the bar.
Funny you should say that. So we were doing, the 9th chapter of our character, Lady Death. And this means this is a story that brought her to Earth. She'd actually been spending about the last 2 years in hell. So we actually got through the entire story and we were done and we were literally about to assign it to the artist. And we just had sort of a series of epiphanies and realized, okay, this is going to steer us in a certain direction. So we actually scrapped it and rewrote from scratch. Like we just went chuck. That's the only time that's occurred. And usually we're working pretty far in advance, Jeff. So as an example, I know that we have literally in pre-production the next La Muerta chapter. So that's for May of 2021. We're writing our character Lady Death for February of 2021, but we have her plotted roughly with enough goalposts for about the next 3 years.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah, and the luck of the Irish is that we haven't had to change course. And sometimes some of the things that I'm trying, this character is actually a fantasy-driven character, the character Lady Death, but I am having fun and I'm sort of tapping into my inner 70s comic book nerddom and kind of veering the character into another genre, which we would call horror superhero. Got characters like Ghost Rider. I know I'm starting to get nerdy now, but Ghost Rider, Son of Satan, Blade, these characters from Marvel's 70s. And as coming out of fantasy into that world, sort of tentative, are people going to accept it? But story-wise, I was all in for years. And if this thing didn't work, I'm toast. But thankfully, people are going for the ride so far. So, yeah, I think, we've had the process in manufacturing. We try to do as much testing as we can so that we're debugged. But again, we had that content issue last fall where we're literally on the press. And printer said, if you're willing to change the content, we'll print it. And I said, yeah, that's not what we're company's about. So we respectfully declined, but that put us back to zero.
Wow.
We recovered and we did get it out and people were happy.
That's good. Yeah. That's an interesting stance that the printer took. I don't usually hear that from printers. Yeah, it's
true. Very interesting. Yeah. So I, in retrospect, I get it. I didn't even begrudge them candidly. Cause this is, here we are, scrappy, independent outlaw comic book publisher, but still this was like a $200 million printing plan. Everyone's like, shirt and tie and their clients are the captains of industry. So I get, okay, they actually had an employee who didn't like it and they were actually afraid of their exposure. So,
oh, wow. Interesting.
I agree that that's unusual, but I didn't begrudge them just kind of knowing their targets. They're all the casinos out here, their clients. So it's like, okay.
They
don't need to get like beaten up because of like one scrappy comic book.
Right. That's funny. Now, when you got to the scale that you guys have gotten to, are other opportunities starting to come your way in terms of like, how do these things get into the movies at some point or how do they grow and how do you manage those types of conversations?
So yes, actually. So we've actually had a producing partner for our company for several years, and I have to be vague about this, which I wish I couldn't be vague, but our character La Muerta, things are occurring with that character at a fairly rapid speed in other media, let's say. And then our character Lady Death has actually been kind of a tough one. So Lady Death was an animated feature film that came out in about 2006. There was a giant trend called anime. And so an anime style of that character was made this was during the height of home video. We sold literally millions of copies through home video at that time. And since then, we've actually have worked with some big names in quote unquote developing that character for presentation. So about 2 years ago, we went out with a bunch of Emmy Award winners, this, that, and the other. I don't think the take really hooked producers, and I'm being super honest. So we actually went back into formulation, and then into next year, we're going to go quote unquote back out because we've actually reformulated. The character's been in print. That character, Lady Death, has been in print for so long. One of the challenges is like, well, where do you start? And her start is actually in medieval times. And frequently producers don't respond well to fantasy period pieces because of expense. So it's a longer story, and it's an interesting story, like Hollywood horror stories, but we've always been matriculating somewhere in that space with, options and development games and stuff. And
right.
La Muerta is actually, because she's so meat and potatoes, is like much further along, and great things are happening. I'm just not at liberty to discuss.
Yeah. No, I get. I guess what I was trying to get to is kind of knowing as a company when to stay in your lane or when to push, and right, because I see a lot of startup people, a lot of the people I talk to, they want to do it all, and then they don't make a great. For your example, they make bad comic books because now they're doing 25 other things. So like, I guess as it seems like that's probably in your camp. How are you making sure that you're producing what you want to produce at a high level every time?
That's a great question. I mean, for sure, you could kind of, when you get a level of success, you can kind of get drunk and think that you could do everything.
Yeah.
But this is what I like to tell people, because even our fans will say, can you please make this? Can you please make that? And this is what we say. This is what we do. We take paper, we put ink on it, and we either staple it or glue it. That's our core competency. So we kind of stick to the core competency. And through the years, we have had sub-projects where we've worked in making statues and action figures. And we do have some background, like in another lifetime, Jeff, I actually went to NYU Film. I worked as an assistant director in commercials and videos. So I know a little bit about the actual manufacturing element of that world, and the development element of that world is the relatively newer one. So I kind of know enough to wade in, but not get in the way, and realize a lot of that stuff is team building. Yeah. So we frequently just stay in our lane because we notice that, I mean, I've been in the game for a while, so I noticed I have better trajectory and success when I stay in my core competency. Yeah. But when I start getting a little goofy, things get weirder. I mean, the one thing that we have done in terms of expansion is we actually fulfill other project creators' Kickstarter in the comic book space. Since
that's cool.
We do that, and since we do that, like Morning Noon and I have an entire staff. I'm always improving the process. We do that with about 4 or 5 other creators who are really producing nice $100,000 plus Kickstarters for comics, and looking to do more in that. So we have a lot of enthusiasm for that because we're pretty good at it.
Yeah, that's really great. You mentioned something just a minute ago about just our team building and how important it is for these other things. What did you, when you're putting together this core team that we talked about a little bit ago too, what were you looking for? What was like, and again, I think this is so challenging for a lot of startups or entrepreneurs to put together the right people. For you guys, what were you looking for? Who's the right person for your team?
So there's 2 teams that we work with. So we have the creative teams, and frequently they are there wherever they are in the world. And so we're really judging their professional reputation and their social currency. What are they up for? Now, we as a company, our mission statement is to provide fun and excitement in the domain of rock and roll inspired supernatural comics. So everything's got to come down from there. So in terms of the actual teams that we build, in terms of our actual staff, above all, we're interested in attitude. So we like people that want to be hardworking. I don't expect people to work, all hours of the day, but when they're working, they're rocking it out. Yeah. We like to know that people generally have a positive mental attitude, as corny as that sounds, because the company that we're projecting out to be, we need to be that company with each other. Sure. So we have to be, we have to be respectful. We have to be fun with each other. And it's not always easy, obviously, but so the main components are good mental attitude, willingness to work, and willing to evolve, as abstract as that sounds. So I think that as opposed to like hiring, I don't know, here's like an executive from this other company, I'm going to hire that person out, and this is going to be an A-type personality who may or may not conform to the mission. We wouldn't do that way. So we're more homegrown, let us say.
Right.
And
that makes sense.
And again, as corny as it sounds, since we are a rock and roll inspired supernatural comic book company, people got to be able to rock and roll. They really do. Like, you don't have to love rock and roll, but you got to be willing to rock and roll.
Yeah, that's cool. You know, let's flip over to a little bit more just Kickstarter centric. So let's go back to those early days, which is where a lot of my listeners are. I mean, they're in the early days of this. You know, what are advice, or what would you tell somebody, you know, on that first campaign? You know, prepare for this.
Yeah, prepare to be exhausted. So it's the first campaign. So much of it was new for us. Even as we launched our campaign, no matter how much we researched, we didn't fundamentally realize that on Kickstarter, we could really only choose one reward. We thought it was a store and you could buy 30, you could get 30 things. So we had to learn and work around and manage and train on over pledging add-ons.
Yeah.
But I would say too, like the thing that Kickstarter and crowdfunding requires that people really get gobsmacked about is the amount of communication. So someone in your company, I believe, has to be the communicator, the customer service person. And maybe it was just dumb luck, but when our company began, there first was myself. You know, I still had a little mail order business, but the first person I hired, their title was customer service manager. And it really has borne out for us. Yeah. So even to this day, any number of us, there might be up to 4 people who will communicate out on a kick. You know, as much as we'd like everybody to communicate through messengers, through the messenger, they're going to communicate through updates or comments within the updates. Yeah. So we do kind of have not scripts, what we call evergreen communication, just so it's very consistent. But I think, boy, that first campaign, be ready to be pretty exhausted, to expect the unexpected, and to have a lot, depending on your category. For example, in the world of games, the amount of communication can be in the thousands. Yep. The queries, the questions. And what I would say too is, okay, so 1, be ready to be exhausted. 2, be ready to really communicate a lot. But number 3, be ready for the rest of your life to be eternally patient, because you are going to answer the same question for the rest of your life. And you need to show excitement, enthusiasm. You want to invite that person in. They cannot be to blame if you've been doing 20 Kickstarters over 5 years and they just arrived and they have all the basic questions. You kind of got to, like, our attitude is, and this is actually a mantra, it's up in the office, it's like people arrive when they arrive and we welcome them. Yep. They're just on people could be in different parts of the chain. And the way I would just illustrate this for your listeners who are starting out, I'd illustrate it by this story. So we're doing a 30-day campaign. And during that 30-day campaign, I am doing a horrible marketing technique called carpet bombing. So it's spam, but it's like right below it. And I'm communicating on every platform I can, anyone who will listen. And I'm trying to glove the message, but really I'm saying, back my campaign, get my stuff. And I'm doing everything in my power to make it sound different. So, but I'm doing like 17 messages a day. No shame in my game. So Facebook, Twitter, Insta, updates, mailing list, blah, 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 blah. So it's the 29th day of the campaign. On my Facebook wall, some guy comes out of the woodwork and he says, "Hey, Pulido, when are you going to get off your ass and do something new?" And it was the illustration. It was my opportunity to either say, "Hey, dude, don't you know?" Or instead what I said, "Hey, man, just so happens that I'm doing this. You want to come along for the ride?" Yeah. And that's a thing I think folks have to be very, very patient with. And in comic books, there's a lot of repetition. And really, when we interview people to be part of staff early on, we almost test them. It's like, how are you with repetition? Because some stuff is so repetitive. If you kind of like if you have if it's an obstacle, get out now. Because some, like these types of communications, etc. So the biggies, prepare to be exhausted, be ready to have someone to communicate to customer service. And 3, just always welcome people wherever they are, whenever they are, no matter what, because it's new to them. I know it's not new to you. Like your campaign is old to you by day 29, but people just arrive when they arrive and just get ready to welcome to the party.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. We try to stress all the time to people around, yes, I understand that you put it on Facebook 20 times, but they weren't on Facebook the 20 times that you decided to post it because they were on the 21st time and they missed it. So it's more, it's like 100 times more than you think in your mind. Like, I posted yesterday.
Yeah.
Cool. Right. What else?
Good for you.
Great. Yeah. What's next? Yeah.
What I love about that too is like Kickstarter, crowdfunding, business. It just teaches you ultimate humility, because it's just like, all right, big boy, put your big boy pants on and communicate again. And it's like, just because you said it, people didn't pick up on it.
Right. I'm sorry that they weren't, we're not even watching TV at like the 8 o'clock time anymore, but your message was so important. It's just like, come on, dude.
Right.
Are there like metrics that you look for that tell you that you're ready to launch? I know you may be a little bit different, but is there something that you're looking for around like, listen, we know we've got the excitement. We know we've got influencer or whatever. Like we know we have enough in the can.
Well, I guess, we kind of use our crowdfunding as a publishing schedule, and we're letting people know even way in advance, up to a year in advance, something's coming in August, something's coming in October. And then I just start, and this is kind of fun for me, I start like feeding little information, and here it comes, only 30 days, 14 days, 7 days, 9 days, and like a little more information each time. And we don't over communicate on the campaign updates. We only go to the previous one. So what I mean by that is, let's say I'm doing a new La Muerta storyline. I'll communicate on our last ever campaign and use that as opposed to like communicating on 20. That way I'm not spamming people, and I'm kind of hedging that folks are more tuned in there. And certainly we are communicating on social, and we're communicating through our voluminous mailing list as well. Right. But I guess I'm sort of counting on every time that I'm building up like a peak marketing moment. And I really, really, really want to create that hockey puck effect for that first 24 hours. Yeah. I'm trying to create a peak moment where we get as many backers as humanly possible, because I think, as you probably know, if I could achieve X in a 24-hour period, it's very likely, statistically speaking, that it's going to take another 29 days to raise that exact same amount. Yeah. And that's counting on us still doing a lot. Right. It. Right. So I'm all about the hockey puck effect and that peak marketing moment. And
go ahead.
I was going to say that when we put a lot behind that too. We put like parties and, what's going on here. We straight up, we rent movie studios, dress it, invite 300 people, no joke. And, carry on like fools, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, it's fun.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Really, really cool. What, over this period of time of running these campaigns, has there been something that stuck out as like something that you just had no idea about? Like countries that are supporting you, or I don't even know, price points. I don't know. It's just something that's like, man, I did not, there's no way we could have ever expected this.
I mean, in our first year, our first Lady Death campaign, and Lady Death was a character, she had some provenance. I've been telling her story since about 1994. But even then, a $76,000 campaign fundamentally for a comic book was a knockout. Yeah. But we just actually completed a Lady Death campaign in March, and that was $347,000. Yeah. So what's kind of knocking me out is the amount of people who are coming to the party this many years into the game. I mean, I'm super gratified by that. As far as unique places where our stuff gets to, doesn't actually answer your question, but I just got to tell the story. So I put it out there about 18 months ago where it's like, we've literally shipped to every continent except the South Pole. Unbeknownst to me, a person who's an artistic contributor to us actually got a bunch of books to the South Pole, had a scientist get it right down to the peak, write the latitude and longitude to it, film it, et cetera, and then gave us such a lovely surprise in March that we actually did get to the South Pole. So
it's great.
It was great to happen. And then the next thing I said was like, okay, we got to get to outer space. So that's the next one we're working on. We could
Yeah, I mean,
miniaturize. Remember, there. I think that in NASA they have this program where they miniaturized a Bible and got 100 of them out in space. So it's like maybe I can miniaturize a
there you go.
microfiche, a comic, and
Yeah,
hitch a ride. Call up
Yeah.
Tesla. What's it going to take to hop on board?
Yeah, that's sweet. So who are your let's say, who's your two or three influencers? Like, who are your main guys that got you into this, make what you just love, like whatever they put out, I'm into it.
Wow. I mean, so as a comic book fan, in our world, there's a man. His name is Jack Kirby, and his nickname is the King. And he was this little guy, and from the 40s all the way to the early 90s, his creative output was mind-boggling. Thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of pages in every genre. And imagine through the decades, there were different genres that were popular in comics. Right. In the 40s, it was war comics and superheroes. In the 50s, it was horror and, believe it or not, romance and war. But Kirby had such an explosive imagination. He gave rise to so many characters in pop culture. I could name some of them that would be kind of geeky, but I mean, there he is as co-creator of the Fantastic Four. He had a hand in the design of Spider-Man. So on the one hand, we frequently hear about Stan Lee, and Stan Lee certainly deserves his place. Among comics professionals, we all kind of know the guy who really designed it all, and it was Kirby. So Jack Kirby would be my number one influencer. And it may not be super direct. It was his explosive and wild imagination. Right here as I sit next to you, I'm in my office, and within a hand's reach are about 50 Jack Kirby books. And it's sort of like in a moment of terror or I don't know, it's the emergency go-to. It's like Kirby's right nearby. Yeah. Kirby's nearby in case. Just whatever. I got to cool my head off.
Yeah.
So
that's
Kirby's
great.
The big dude. Yeah.
That's cool. So where does Art Crumb, right? Where does he fit? Is that all artwork?
Well, Art Crumb was actually Art Crumb was a writer and an artist, and he was known, and he was part of a community called Underground Comics.
Okay.
But he, as a creator, actually wound up being completely transcendent. And if one is lucky enough to own original art from Crumb, we're talking about like good seminal pieces from his work could be $50,000, $100,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, comics are made for all sorts of ages and categories. So Art Crumb and the underground comic makers of the 70s were kind of for the hippie, tuned out culture of that time.
Yep.
But if you were to go into a comic shop or look around the world, there's comics that are directed for young adult, literally for children, for adolescents, and then frequently like our target is college age and above. So, and then if you look at comics and comic storytelling globally, if you were to go to Asia, there is literally a comic book for any interest. There's comic books about cooking. There's comic books that are targeted towards like grandmas and grandpas, and they're really used to reading that stuff. It's just so embedded in their culture. So yeah, I mean, if you look deep, there's something for everyone.
That's crazy. Yeah, I asked about art because I worked on the Cream magazine documentary.
Super cool, dude. That's great. So man, I love Cream as a kid. Love reading it.
Yeah. We and then my video team was principal photography on the doc. So
that's awesome.
shot. Yeah, so we got to interview.
Boy howdy.
Oh yeah, boy howdy. Yeah, we got to record almost everybody. It was sweet. Alice Cooper at a Fort Wayne hotel, or we're at a hotel in Fort Wayne in like the cheapest hotel you can imagine because that's what he gets. And then there's Alice Cooper. It doesn't line up. That's it's so weird. But very cool. Well, I've been ending my episodes with sort of a lightning round, not associated with crowdfunding, and basically just because we're all locked inside. So a couple questions. So what's the last thing you watched either on Netflix or Hulu or some streaming thing? What was the last thing you watched?
I was on Shudder. I watched a comedy called One Cut of the Dead, and it's about a group of amateur filmmakers who try to make a zombie story in one shot. And I totally recommend it. You don't have to like zombie movies. It's a comedy. It runs around 90 minutes, and it was just super funny. I highly recommend it to anyone.
That's cool. Is that a movie or is it like or was it a show?
Yeah, so it's a movie. It runs
Movie.
runs 90 minutes,
90
but
minutes.
ostensibly, as you're watching it, the first 45 minutes is them making the one shot.
Oh, wow.
And as you're watching it, a lot of things come up. I would like to be vague, but in the next 45 minutes goes behind and shows everything that went into what you saw in the first 45 minutes. And it's a hoot.
Yeah, that would be, I will have to put that on the list. Something
One
to watch.
Shot of the Dead. Really funny.
All right. Yeah, I'll check that out. How about, are there any, now obviously I know you listen to my podcast every day, every episode. You're a big fan. Any other podcasts you listen to?
I must admit, I am totally ignorant. I'm being honest with you. I'm ignorant of podcasts. So it's a relatively new form for me.
Okay. Gotcha. How about books? You reading anything right now?
Yeah. So I just finished an anthology called Knights of the Living Dead. And this was a who's who of authors who have written zombie fiction. And what the premise is, it takes place in the exact same time frame as the movie Night of the Living Dead.
Oh, okay.
So that's one thing. And I'm always reading like 50 things. So the next thing, it's just what it is. In the world of comic books, I've really fallen in love with this particular writer named, I think his name is Jeff Lemire, I think is his last name. And he wrote a story for the company Vertigo called Sweet Tooth. And I can't recommend it enough. I think it was picked up by Netflix for a series. Oh, cool. And the premise is simple. It's sometime after a global pandemic, topical, where probably 99% of the people are gone. And there are these animal children. They're born as hybrids, human, animal. And it's the story of this one particular kid named Gus. And he's lured out of his very sheltered life with some candy bars, hence the sweet tooth. And it's the story of the origin of this horrible pandemic and this really innocent child. So amid horrific violence and intensity, it's ultimately a story of friendship. And this guy, for me, a person who's read comics his whole life, like this guy, Jeff Lemire, he's knocking me out. So Sweet Tooth has been really rad.
That's very, very cool. And my last one is, are there, websites that you kind of frequent to or places to go that for you to like find info on marketing or just like, hey, I want to be up to date on stuff. Like what's going on? What's the latest trends or something like that?
Oh, that's a really good question. I am so all over the place on that like nothing's off the limits and nothing comes to the top of my head, but it's kind of nothing's off limits. What I will say is this though, to that topic, regardless of what's been new, what I find that really works in the domain of marketing and promotion is really some of just the standard, good, classic stuff. So right behind me, you can't see it, maybe you can. I have a whole row and it's just marketing, but it's all the old school stuff. And so this is, in a nutshell, it occurs to me that having a solid, up-to-date mailing list is important.
Yeah.
That you're providing up-to-date, up-to-the-moment, fun or on-brand content all the time. And then another element of marketing and promotion, I would say, is, just be your word and be your promise. Like those three things I feel as if they've carried us. Now, us as a company, we haven't had that amazing moment where, I don't know, Steven Spielberg wore a Lady Death t-shirt. Like we haven't had that influencer moment yet. The fallback of just that simple, normal stuff like build your mailing list, provide content all the time is really, I'd probably say it's probably the secret to our success.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Brian, where should I send people or where should people go to kind of dive into your world, absorb if it's their first time, right? Let's just say that this is the first time hearing about it. Where should they go?
Well, if anything that I've said has piqued your interest, may I encourage you and cordially invite you to coffincomics.com. If you go there, that'll be the gateway to a myriad of all kinds of fun and tantalizing things that will thrill you.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, Brian, I appreciate taking time out of your day. I know your busy schedule, and this was a great conversation. I'm so glad that we could get a chance to connect and do a podcast. I think we started this with making the red light coming on. I think we did it. I think we made a good episode. Right on, man. I'm happy to hear that. It was an absolute pleasure, man. I look forward to doing it once again in the future. Awesome, man. Thanks so much. Peace out, man. Thank you. Bye. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.